This episode is brought to you by Deal. Managing a global team is complex. Deal makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance, all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deal to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deal works at deal.com/agentan to learn more. That's DEEL.com/ADRIANTAN. Deal, your forever people platform.
Come to the mantra that life is about suffering, and it's about choosing your suffering. Kids are probably the most inefficient thing you can do in your life, but so incredibly soulful, right? I gave birth to two babies at once, right? One is my son and one is my business, and it's not something I would recommend to anyone.
Hello, Suga. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How would you introduce yourself to someone you just met?
I am the founder of Hidden Gems Talent. We are a platform that helps early stage founders and small agencies find top remote talent in Malaysia.
And this is something that you have only started pretty recently. Let's wind back the clock a little bit and help people understand where did you start out in your career and how do you land up in doing what you're doing right now?
My background is actually in investment. I am probably a cautionary tale for why young graduates should probably invest in career coaching before they launch their career. Because when I started my career, I really wanted to be a journalist. In fact, I was freelancing as a journalist, but then, a lot of folks told me, journalism, you cannot make money, journalism is dead. And so I thought, okay, well,
They're
what's
not
the point
wrong
of a
lah.
career?
They're not wrong lah.
They are not. But I do think there's still space for high quality journalism, Adrian. To give you some context, one of my best friends recently won the Peabody, right? And we both graduated together. And she won the Peabody. So, I think maybe in Asia it's a much tougher game because people are less willing to pay for high quality journalism. But I think there's still a space, and I always watch journalists with so much admiration, especially the really good ones, right? But I digress. So I wanted to become a journalist, and people said, my dad said no. In fact, I spoke to a couple of journalists who also said no. Then I thought, okay, what's the point of a career? And at that point, I had no money, and so the thought process was, okay, let's find a job that's going to pay me the most. And so I actually started out working for an oil and gas company. And I became a petroleum economist there, where we were basically doing oil and gas deals, buying and selling oil fields. And then I liked the process of buying and selling, and I thought, I can buy and sell other things. And that's when I went into investments, so private equity. I worked for a private equity fund in Malaysia, and then I came to Singapore and I worked for a private equity fund that invested in the Mekong region. But as I spent over a decade in private equity, I thought, I actually really like the operational side of things. I enjoyed speaking more to founders and really like deep diving into their problems. I thought, okay, I really want to give myself a shot at becoming an operator. And I found a role where I was chief of staff to an Indonesian company. And that is how I got introduced to the recruitment space, to the space of cross-border talent. And ultimately, here I am. I enjoyed learning about cross-border talent so much. I felt like we had a big impact, and I decided to start my own business. But I still do hold a fractional position in the investment fund that I've been working for actually coming up to 9 years now.
Your main thing right now is actually building up your business, which would be, I would imagine, your first time doing something on your own with, skin in the game.
Absolutely. It's been such a transition going from, always having a paycheck to not having one. I think I've come to the mantra that life is about suffering. And it's about choosing your suffering, right? I think in employment, I think now as I'm an entrepreneur, I realized the stability employment provided, and the peace of mind that you could have with employment. But there was also a kind of suffering there, right? Because I was the kind of person who was always agitated, always wanted to do more, wanted to do things differently, and so it was a kind of suffering there. Whereas here, I don't have that anymore. Whatever I want to do, I can figure it out and I can go and get it done. But of course, it does mean that you can't shut off in the same way.
When did the idea of starting your own thing came into your mind, and how long did it linger before you decide to trigger it?
I would say the idea of starting my own thing only came into my mind when I was in my previous role. And I was fortunate that I was able to build something from scratch in my previous company. So in previous company, we were, they were exploring a few monetization strategies, and I was the chief of staff. And so they gave me the opportunity to build something from scratch, right? And that was exploring monetization in the cross-border field. And as I built it, I thought, okay, actually, this is not rocket science. I think prior to that, if you don't come from an entrepreneurial family, you think, wow, business is just for certain select few, right? And I realized, okay, business actually, if there are playbooks out there, and I always tell myself whenever I get overwhelmed, I tell myself, hey, I'm not trying to build a rocket to Mars. I'm just trying to build a simple platform that helps people, in Malaysia find remote roles. Okay, this is not rocket science. It's been done before. And now you're trying to make it your own and make it better. So let's go through the mechanics of it, right? So I think once I got to see that, okay, this can be done and it's not rocket science, then the thought process, then I knew I wanted to start something. And it probably took me more than a year, actually, to get there. I have to tell you, I went around telling people, hey, you know what? I'm going to start a business. I think for 1 year, I told people this, thinking that it would actually get me to start a business. And
you're hoping to get peer pressure to push you through.
Yeah, and I could see people getting tired, right? My friends were like, yeah, we've been listening to this for a year. So what's next? Are you actually going to start it? And, I think ultimately it was when my son was born, right? I was pregnant, my son was born. And I thought, you know what? If I don't do this, I won't be able to look at my own kids, right, down the road, and say, yeah, encourage them to also have their own adventures, because guess what? Your mom was too scared to take that leap on her own. So I think that's where for me was that try and fail is okay, then never trying it off.
Being a father myself, I also have many moments where kids will come into the picture when I'm trying to, especially in very tricky gray area kind of situation, where I could actually just pull a fast one and get through this situation. But oftentimes, then you're also wondering, okay, if my kid were to tell me they're in the same situation, what would I tell them? I would tell them to do the right thing. And if I were to tell them to do the right thing, then I should do the right thing.
It's such a great hack, right? To think about what is the advice you would give your own kid, because you want your own kid to live the fullest life possible. And so why wouldn't that advice apply to you?
The CEO of the platform Ghost, he put out a tweet that mentioned, is it any coincidence that Tim Ferriss, Lex Fridman, and Andrew Huberman all are above 40 and no kids?
I did read that post. Yeah. It was actually great. I did actually start to think about it, because we listen to all these guys and we think, wow, their life is been hacked to the point of perfection. Except yeah, they don't have kids, they don't have a family, and so there's a phrase that I often think about, which is the opposite of efficiency is soulfulness. Kids are probably the most inefficient thing you can do in your life, but so incredibly soulful, right? I don't think there is and personally for me, I don't think there is a more soulful experience than kind of growing and and watching your kids grow.
Exactly why I'm doing this podcast series right now, speaking with solopreneurs like yourself, because as I become older, I'm very cautious about giving people advice, much as I have a book on a lot of advice. But I'm always very afraid of, even when we first met and you were telling me about, this part, I learned so much from this and that. You couldn't tell, but I was cringing inside because all that was running through my head was, did I share the right thing? Did I push someone off the cliff? And things like that. So it always helped to, I guess, pay more attention to the philosopher and not so much the philosophy itself, because many times what they do and what they tell you may be a very different thing. And even if they're doing the same thing, I think it's very important to look at the situation that they come from. I remember following this LinkedIn guru, and he proposed, you do this, you do that, every day spend 2 hours doing this, doing that. Then I was thinking, where got time? 2 hours a day? Then I realized, he is childless by design. He and the wife, no kids. No wonder got so much time lah. Go gym lah, do this lah, cold plunge lah, that kind of bullshit nonsense. Parents like us don't have time for that.
Completely agree. I think I myself, I gave birth to 2 babies at once, right? One is my son and one is my business. And it's not something I would recommend to anyone. I think for me, I just felt like I had to do it and I was just going to suck it up and do it. But certainly, I think it has, if I look back through my life, this was probably one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging year that I've ever experienced. But I think it also pushed me to grow, in ways that, I never thought it would, right? Hopefully, I think what I saw in business, Adrian, is business compounds. So you asked me when I really made the decision, what was the trigger point? It was when I saw that, in the first year, we put in 100% of effort to get 100% of result. But I saw that in the second year, if you wanted to achieve the same result, you could probably put in just 50-60% of effort to get that 100%. And the third year, and to me, everybody talks about the compounding effect in investment.
Yep.
But actually, I saw the compounding effect being so real in building a business that I felt like, I have to start today because I want to live through. I want that compounding effect to start now, right? Even though I have a young kid, but it has been definitely really tough because every time you spend time with the business, you start to think, this is time I'm taking away from my kid. And as much as you want your business to compound, hey, guess what? Your kids are only going to be small for so long. You can't build a business and then suddenly go back and say, hey, where was the 1-year-old that I left behind, all those years ago? They've grown up, they've got their own lives. So, I've also spoken, as much as I speak very keenly to entrepreneurs to understand their journey, I also talk to a lot of parents to understand, what they would do differently, what worked, what didn't work, and try to apply kind of the same sort of, I don't call it problem-solving mindset, or the same intellectual curiosity to both dimensions of my life.
You're not trying to build a rocket ship to colonize Mars. You're just trying to build something simpler, something that you can, maybe not so much of a lifestyle business, but something that suits what you're doing right now, and that perhaps will give you more time to pursue other more important stuff like your kid.
Ultimately, I would like the business to serve my life, right, and not the other way around. I think there's a lot of joy in building the business, and I realized I have a team. I have a small team with me now, and I really do enjoy coaching them. And one thing that I do is I make required reading is the Netflix No Rule book, right? And I make them all read that because a big part of the book is candor, and I don't think I could explain to them how to create a culture of candor better than that book does. So what does it mean? And it's been very positive so far. I feel like they read the book. They now feel like they have permission. I've been getting very interesting feedback. Things like, hey, Suga, you said you would do this, but you didn't. And I'm like, Yeah, you're right. I actually put it down my priority list. So if you feel like I should reprioritize it, then ping me and call me out on it. It's cool. So I do like. I mean, I guess these are all things that I try to enjoy, right? And not just kind of. When I started, I thought, okay, I have a number. I'm just going to race to that number. But I think now, as I see the business growing, I realize, okay, wait, just enjoy it. You already enjoy building a business, and enjoy being a mother, enjoy building the business, and have faith in yourself. This is probably the hardest part of all. I think to have faith in yourself.
This part about candor, I'm interested to learn. Did that come naturally for you, or is it something that you picked up along the way?
So I come from a family where candor was very highly encouraged. And I actually attribute this to the dynamic between my mom and dad. I have a very opinionated mother and
Who doesn't?
father who... But I think what was different is I had a father who was actually very open-minded. I guess because he maybe worked for a British MNC, BP, and so he tried to introduce that same culture that he saw in BP, and he lived in London as well. Tried to introduce the same kind of culture in our house, right? So we often saw our mother giving her opinions. We often saw our father, encouraging opinions and moderating, but also disagreeing. So our house was always so noisy at home. Our neighbors used to say, "Whoa, what's going on there?" So because we're always debating, and our dinner table was like that. So, I wanted that same spirit, right? I've always found that it worked best. I also went to a liberal arts college in the US. I enjoyed that culture, and I wanted that, but that's not so easy. So my team is also fully remote. Indonesians on my team, Malaysians, and Asian cultures are not the most candid. So you have to do something differently if you want to give their opinion.
Time you ask for feedback as a boss of a company, people may be thinking, is this entrapment? Are you trying to trap me into saying something that I shouldn't say? But I think it's really refreshing to hear. And a lot of times things can just move so much faster if you're just upfront with one another versus going a big round, beating around the bush, trying to signal optics here and there like all the China leadership is doing right now. Those are just making life so hard for everybody.
Given I specialize in remote talent, we see candidates often use this excuse, right? My family member is sick, so I have to leave this job to take care of them. Then you ask, wait, but what? Who's going to supplement? Who's going to give you income? Say, it's okay. And then, my family member is sick, my dog died. They will give you everything other than the actual reason, right? So we see this so often. And I think it will take some time for Asian cultures to change. But I think when you can, where companies have been successful, it's worked out really well. But I ultimately think the onus is on the boss, right, or the founder, to show that, hey, you're not going to be penalized. In fact, you're probably going to be rewarded when you're candid.
You talk about the challenges that you have gone through, and it was quite a challenging period so far. Walk us through this period, and I'm also fascinated to learn, did in any way your past experience as an economist, as a VC, influence you in any way on how you operate your business?
Until you get to that first dollar, you are always going to be on the brink of like insanity, because you're like, what am I doing with my life? I don't have a paycheck anymore, and I'm not bringing in any money. So until you get to your first dollar, I feel like you're just always going to be questioning, right? So I would fill my days with like meetings, just trying to meet people, trying to understand what they need, trying to sell, trying to figure out, right, what am I doing here? Even though I had done this once before and I thought, hey, it's going to be easy, I think the second time, actually surprisingly, it was harder, because before I still had the paycheck, I had a team around me, So it wasn't as much of a, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, a mind fuck. Whereas I think when you come on your own, it really does, you have to have a different mindset. And I think most people are, unless they've seen it, it's not a natural mindset to adopt. I would post on LinkedIn, and then I would have my husband vet my posts. I think this was a big step for me. I've been totally off social media for 10 years, but I realized, hey, if I want to get my brand out there, I got to start writing, and I love writing. So, okay, let's play to your strengths, right? So I started posting on LinkedIn, but every single post was like, it was a little traumatic, right? I would ask my husband to read it. We would edit it. It felt like, wow, we were writing like some serious hardcore stuff, but actually it wasn't. And I think that those initial steps, I feel like I just had to go through them, right? Today, it takes me half an hour to write a LinkedIn post. I'm very comfortable experimenting, but back then you feel like everything has to be perfect. But I think once you start seeing customers come and customers come back, then you start to get confidence in yourself. I think the earliest was also tough because I had a baby, and I wanted to make sure that I was fully present there, but at the same time I also committed to building a business. So yeah, those are some of the tougher moments, certainly. What did I use for my investment background? I think ultimately it was in investments, right? You're very number centric to a fault. But because what did I do as an investor? I come to a table, I review the numbers. Okay, if the numbers are great, end of story. We shake hands, we have a wonderful dinner, then we go back to our own lives. But if the numbers are crap, then we start to dig deep, right? Oh, what happened? And then, the blame game starts. We become a bit more, the relationship can become a bit more antagonistic and all of that. So I was very focused on numbers from day one. I closed my account, very promptly. I have my metrics done, very well. And in fact, what I do is I actually submit my account to my husband and one of my advisors at the end of every month, like I would to an investor, right? Even though I didn't take any investment money, but I do this as a matter of practice because I think creating those accountability structures are quite important.
The numbers that you mentioned to a fault, is that something that many other businesses that you see, especially for solopreneurs, they should also be really looking into what makes sense versus what the numbers make sense to them?
We all have like a story in our head, right? We all have a story about how we're doing, how the business is going, and it's very easy to get caught up with the stories of our head. But the numbers don't lie. And if the story in your head and the numbers align, that's great. If the story in your head and the numbers don't align, then you got to figure out, okay, is this a short-term misalignment? And that can happen, right? Because sometimes your business has a long lead cycle, so your numbers are not reflecting what's actually going on in the business. In which case, you should probably have better operating metrics, right? Or leading indicators to really tell you. But ultimately, even with me, even though I think I'm so great with numbers, my husband will sit down with me at the end of the month and he'll say, hey, look at some of your unit economics here. It's actually not really working out the way you're explaining to me. And then I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, I got to pay like all these fees. Oh yeah, you know what? Maybe this one, yeah, I should have negotiated better on this one, right? So I think it's always good to deep dive into your numbers. And in fact, as an investor back then, how comfortable entrepreneurs were with their numbers was a huge indicator to me of how competent they were. If they couldn't talk through their own numbers, I would be a little skeptical. I would be like, whoa, do you actually know what's going on?
I know many people who always tell me, I cannot do in numbers. If I can do in numbers, I would have become an accountant. I would have become a statistician. But I think when it comes to business, much as you may not have to do it as hardcore as an economist, but you still have to be comfortable facing it, even if it's like the worst enemy you want to face.
You don't have to put the numbers together, but you got to know your top line and your margins, right? At least those very basic figures, top line and margin. Okay. And then of course your cash. How's your cash flow, your net cash flow, right? At the very least, that's the most basic thing. If you don't know that as an entrepreneur, I think it's very tough. You can very easily get caught up, just doing a whole bunch of things, but not really accomplishing anything. When I have to do my accounts, I do it with a bit of trepidation because I'm like, what am I going to see? But I have to tell you, after I finish it, it gives me so much peace of mind.
Every time I do my own personal finances, same thing. I'm like, you gotta take a deep breath. It's like waiting for the X-ray result, for the MRI result. But after you see it and you realize, oh, okay, good. Move on with your life. I want to move on next to the business that you're running right now, which in essence is basically helping businesses here to hire people in other countries in a very simple manner. But of course, we'll deep dive a bit more into it. Now, this isn't really unique in the sense that a lot of companies have been doing this for the longest time. I've known someone who has been doing this just for software developer based in Vietnam. Given that you're only just starting this, how do you approach differentiating yourself amongst other companies in the market right now?
I'm very much focused on young companies, right? Startups, smaller agencies. And I particularly look for companies where there is no HR yet. So in some ways, at this point, I almost act as a HR business partner or a recruitment business partner, right? So really sit down, customize the process, and find folks with strong critical thinking, good communication skills. So at this point, it's a very bespoke and customized recruitment process for a small company. Because I think this segment of the market is perhaps not as well served. I think most people try to go after the enterprise accounts, right? Where there's volume, scale, there's better margins, and I guess, Adrian, you yourself having run a recruitment company, you'll be more familiar with this than most people. So this is the segment I'm going after right now. And I'm also niching down on Malaysia much more. So you mentioned, software developers in Vietnam. I think there's Glints that does Indonesia pretty well. But I do notice, there is more and more of a push to hire talent in Malaysia, but not as many people looking at the Malaysian market closely and creating awareness, right? That these roles exist, that these roles actually pay meaningfully, and the companies can provide a pretty good career path as well.
I do have a friend who is in accounting, and he has resources at one time in Johor Bahru, but that's also because it is next to Singapore. But to hire someone beyond that, I usually don't really see a lot of Singapore companies, like you said, hiring remote people in Malaysia. Why do you think that's the case? Because actually it seems like a no-brainer, right? It's just our neighbor up front. We cross the causeway almost every few months. Why not Malaysia? Why jump to a Vietnam? Why jump to Indonesia?
It's population size, first of all, and then cost. So Malaysia is certainly a little bit more expensive than Indonesia or Vietnam because of labor market dynamics, right? There's more graduates in Indonesia and Vietnam compared to Malaysia. But at the same, and so I think that's why you see a lot of people go to these two markets. And I mean, let's not even start in the Philippines, right? Philippines has been an offshoring destination for decades. But I think in Malaysia, I find that the average quality of talent is pretty high. I think we've also seen a lot of Malaysians just come over to Singapore. They just relocate to Singapore. And I think in the past, that was probably the ideal way to get a Singaporean job, right? I think today, as cost of living in Singapore goes up, it's becoming less sought after. Because whatever pay they get here, they won't be able to save much after they account for all their living costs. So that's why I think remote work or hiring Malaysian remote workers is becoming more and more attractive. Which can and also as remote work becomes more popular, I think there's an ongoing debate between return to office, and I think for bigger organizations, return to office is the dominant way to go. But I think for smaller organizations who saw the gain during COVID, I do see a lot of them saying, "Hey, we're just going to build remotely." I think until the team grows too big and you start to have to build offshore centers, right? So I do think cost is a big factor, and then Malaysians were just coming over to Singapore, so that's why no one really looked at Malaysia and said, "Hey, why don't we just build a remote base?"
Could you help us to give a simple comparison? Let's take maybe a social media person, a junior social media person, any marketing executive, across Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. How much would they cost on average?
Say a digital marketer with 2-3 years experience.
Yep.
All right. So I would say in Singapore, you're looking at about 4K, 4.5 to 5K.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yes. In Indonesia, you are looking at, if you get someone good for, I would say 1.5K.
Okay.
1.5K. So I'm talking, when I say good, right, I mean like speaks good English with thinking skill. I'd say 1.5K, you get that person. In Vietnam, I'm not as familiar as the Vietnamese market, but I do think I've been told hiring good English speakers in Vietnam actually comes at a considerable premium. I've been told like a fresh graduate salary for someone with good English is about 1.5K USD. So I won't comment on the Vietnamese market as much. But then in Malaysia, you could get someone 2-3 years experience for, say, someone really good for 2K. And that easily gets you the top 1%, top 1 to 5% in the Malaysian market, 2K salary. And I think with Malaysia, so I do recruit out of Indonesia as well. But I think what I find is in Malaysia, the average quality is higher. In Indonesia, you really have to sift through a lot to find that one person who can jive with your team.
Many companies who wants to consider offshoring or hiring remote people, they often really try to pay as little as they can. If they can pay someone in South Africa on pennies, they would do it. But it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost that we often may not be able to quantify, we may not be able to see, but we are still paying it nonetheless. Like I said, you have to screen through a lot of resumes. So give us a sense. If I have to find that one digital marketer in Indonesia, how many CVs I actually have to spend going through?
I just hired a recruiter out of Indonesia. We had about 600 applications for the position. We shortlisted 15 because we actually put them through a test. I think we put them through like our own process, right? Shortlisted 15, we ended up interviewing 5, and then we hired 1. But to get from the 700 to 15, we really needed to have a very structured process. But it was also because we knew exactly what we wanted. My recommendation to folks looking to offshore is this. You need to benchmark your salaries, not to the average salary in that country, but you need to benchmark your salary to what the American MNCs are paying. And I say American MNCs because I do notice American MNCs are much more performance driven, or salaries are much more performance driven compared to most other enterprise. So I try to benchmark to what American MNCs are paying. And if you can afford it. For Singaporean companies and Australian companies, which I also serve, you can afford it. It's still It may not be an 80% cost savings like what other offshore companies will promise you, but it would be a good 50 to 60%. And that additional 20% in cost that you pay is well worth it, because you will get someone who's graduated from a good university, who wants to build a career. They're not just looking to job hop for the next $100, $200. They want to stay with you, right? Because once you give them that 20% increase, and in fact, what I would also say is, don't just aim to match what the American MNCs are paying. Offer a bit more, right? Because what happens then is they can't go and find another job that pays as well. They're going to give you everything that they have because they're going to want to keep that job. And they're going to want to stay with you. So that's how I help my clients benchmark salaries. Don't pay the average. You pay the average, you'll just get the average talent, which, the average talent in these countries is not going to be as good as the average talent, say. On the very rare and lucky occasion, you can pay an average salary and really get somebody great. Okay, that happens. I think people are always optimizing for that rare instance, right? Where they maybe heard their friend get somebody really, really good at a very average salary. Then they say, hey, my friend did it, and I want to do it. But I've seen so many cases that I have a pretty good sense of, okay, what's a great salary in these countries? And then once you pay that great salary, you can also demand great results and get it, right? And so you have to ask yourself, are you trying to create a virtuous cycle, or where you pay well and get great performance, or the vicious cycle where you pay the average, but then you also get average results? People will leave you for a couple $100, and then you keep the cycle going on and on.
If you do not want to face the same problem in Singapore for your remote staff, you have to approach it very differently. In Singapore, maybe small companies cannot afford to pay better than Google, for sure. But are you able to pay better than Google Malaysia? If you can, then that is something you may want to consider. Are you able better to pay Amazon Indonesia? Again, something for you to consider. And I think earlier on you mentioned about, you started with 700 applicants, narrow down to 15, interview 5, managed to get 1 in. It seems like a very smooth sailing process, but you also know what you're doing. Most companies that I know of, they don't have a process. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. So if you're trying to have your cake and eat it in such a scenario, I think it's going to be very tough. You can't just expect to pay, I just want to pay $500. I want 3 candidates and I want them to work 24 hours a day. It's just not going to happen.
I do have clients who come and tell me, I'm going to pay above market. And then when they tell me the amount, I'm like, whoa, this is actually even below average, right? So people have all kinds of misconceptions about what a good salary is in these countries. But the way I think about it is, look, you want to work with people who can run at the same pace as you, right? I believe strongly that a team is only as strong as its weakest link. You don't want to hire the remote employee as your weakest link. Okay? Your remote employee should raise the average, or if not, or at the very least, be at the average. If you're going to hire a remote employee that is below the average, please don't, especially if you're a small company.
If the world is going to be your oyster of talent, you want to bring in your superstar. You want to make sure that it can really help you drive your business, where you just couldn't find the opportunity to do so in Singapore because the public service has taken all the talents. The banks have taken up all the talents. But if you can't find it in Singapore, you should try to replicate that overseas. Now, I also want to get to another aspect, which is on how companies should decide if they are ready to consider remote employees. Are there certain checkbox they need to tick first before they embark on such an exercise?
The biggest checkbox, Adrian, is what is the KPI for this remote employee? I think if you are clear on this, then you can hire. And the reason I say this is the biggest and most important factor is because when they're remote, you actually have no way of knowing whether they're actually working. And this is where I see employers get into a tussle with the candidates, right? They say, oh, I don't believe you actually spent 8 hours on this work, versus the candidate saying, look, they just took a lot of time. So be very clear on what the KPI first is at the beginning. And good candidates will tell you, oh, this KPI looks tricky, and they may not take the job. Or they say, yeah, you know what, this KPI is very achievable, and they'll take it, right? So that's one, KPI. Second, your processes. So being very clear, right? Like, okay, if I message you, what is the turnaround time? Like, you should be messaging me back within 30 minutes. And if it's during working hours, you have to be very clear on ultimately good remote work culture, and really getting your team, the entire team, right, working in this way. So having good remote work culture is a big part of it as well. Having processes documented, channels open. I think emphasizing over communication with the remote employees is good. Then the last thing I would say is also onboarding. Do you have a great onboarding experience? So I just worked with a client who was onboarding 3 different remote employees, and he took about a week to put together all the materials for his remote employees, so they would never feel lost. They would never feel like they're working in a silo. And so far it's going great. I think all the training material. So not feeling like, there's a lot of learning that takes place when 2 people are in the same physical environment that you can take for granted, right? And in a remote work environment, you can't lean on this in the same way. So you have to have all of this prepared ahead of time. Be very clear about your expectations of the remote employee. Otherwise, it can actually go sour quite quickly.
Which I guess is why so many employees are so frustrated with working from home when COVID first started, because no company actually have any guidelines, any ethics, anything at all on how they manage people and how people are expected to perform. You just work from home lah, and magic will happen. But and on the contrast, I have seen situations where the employers just do not have any trust. As much as for some reason they want to implement something like this, they will tell you, oh, you can work from home, but your computer cannot be too near to the bed. Must be at least 3 meters away from it.
Oh my God.
That's actually documented. So I think trust is really important, and of course to set very clear, quantifiable guidelines on what is expected from both ends, and making sure that both sides are agreeable with that. So that is definitely a good step. But even before that, the finding part, I think that is probably the bit that troubles many companies, because if you tell me I just look at my talent in Singapore, I know where lah. I go NUS, I go to the school, I go Job Street, things like that. But now if you tell me I can find my talent everywhere, it's like going into a Hong Kong cafe and they offer you 200 items on the menu. You just walk up. You cannot decide. So are there some shorthands you can advise companies out there? Okay, for example, if you want software developer, just go Vietnam. Just go Hanoi. Just go to this particular region. Are there things like that, especially in Malaysia and some of the countries that you cover?
The biggest one is communication, right? You can train for technical skills, but you can't as easily train for communication. Communication, attitude, these are things that are built up years before you even see a candidate, right? So identifying what are the proxies that will tell you if someone has got good communication skills. So here's where, did they go to what universities they went to? Tells you a lot. What extracurricular activities did they do? For us, when we look at Indonesian talent, we look at ISEC, we look at some of the top unis, we look at sometimes they would have also freelanced for other international companies. So those are also good indicators. We also work with certain communities. Referrals have consistently been our best source of talent. So cultivating a referral network. If you actually already have some remote employees, I think giving them a good experience and constantly asking them for their friends to recommend your company onto their friends is also a really good way of identifying good talent in these countries. First of that set us all together. What else? I think across the different countries, right? Okay. I think Indonesia generally has been great for software engineers. Indonesia has been great actually more for marketers, creatives. I think you find some really good talent there. Also some customer success roles, I would say. Find folks that speak good English. Vietnamese, I've heard great things on the software development side. I think the trick here is finding someone who can balance both worlds, right? So maybe a good Vietnamese senior developer who can then guide junior developers and can speak in Vietnamese to them, but then can also speak to management in English. Philippines, lots has been said about customer service, but I do think Philippines is a pretty saturated market. So if you're going to go to Philippines, you as a Singapore company, I'm very honest, you actually don't have much of an advantage in Philippines compared to Indonesia. So if you go to Philippines, you are competing with a big American company, so you got to bring something else with you. But it's also, it's a good place for customer service talent. It's a good place for developers. It's a good place for all kinds of talent, but much more competitive. Malaysia, I would say, is great for roles where you're looking for people who can do multiple things, right? Have got good problem-solving skills, can do sales roles, customer service, because there's less of a cultural gap. I would say a lot of Malaysians, especially at the junior level, can function quite similarly to Singaporeans. And so I would highly recommend Malaysia as a source of talent for when you need multitasking, for people who can wear a few hats.
Your father is currently serving as the community manager for your talent in Malaysia.
Yes.
How is it going along working with your dad?
My dad and I have had, we have a really good relationship. But it's been interesting working with, he's part of the boomer generation, right? And so he's literally he's come out of retirement to work with me. And we have two separate WhatsApp chats. One is it's our personal chat. And then I've set up a group for all our work related stuff, right? Because I think I can be a bit terse at times, and it's just a work style, right? He'll come to me and say, "Hey, this is found something," and I'll say, "Hey, Dad, you've just given me a problem. Now what's the solution?" So it's a very different style, and I think he is getting used to working with the Gen Zs. He's a bit of an over communicator, and I suspect the boomers were. Everything needs to be documented, communicated. Because back then, people wrote letters to each other, then they'll get letters written back and all of that, right? So he communicates with the talent that we have on our payroll, and then he gets very puzzled when they don't respond back. He's like, "Well, they don't respond." I said, "Well, that I don't think there's an action item for them to respond back." So, yeah, the Gen Z, they don't really communicate in the same way. He'll call them up and he'll explain to them the details of their payroll. And I think they find it very refreshing actually, because nobody treats them that way. But I can see, I think there's learning. I think he's learning a lot about the Gen Z because he retired before the Gen Z came into the workforce, right? So I do find it very amusing listening to his thoughts of the Gen Z. But in summary, I think it has been an enjoyable experience so far. I think AI helps a lot, and I've been training my dad to use ChatGPT to troubleshoot his own problem, as opposed to coming to me. And maybe this is a topic for a separate discussion, but I do think there's a lot of value lost when people retire and still want to work but don't want full-time jobs. So I'm experimenting with my dad, and maybe we'll be able to do something down the road with more retirement. But it's been an enjoyable experience. him so far. I mean, I think you have to ask my dad whether he enjoys it. I suspect it's a mixed bag for him. But I certainly have enjoyed it.
Well, at least your Gen Z people finally start getting phone calls, which they've never gotten for the longest time in their life. And just give me an idea what every kid should give their parent: a paid ChatGPT subscription so they can solve their own problems.
I agree. Yeah. Because it's quite intuitive, right? To use
It is,
ChatGPT.
yeah.
You can keep asking as many questions as one. Doesn't get tired.
I really learned so much about your world, what you do, what you did before, and hopefully this will give some inspiration and some thinking for people who are listening or watching this episode, people who might be on the fence, jump off from the fence, or even just looking to set up their own fence. Maybe there's something that could lead them to think about what they want in life, and hopefully they can draw some inspiration from here. Before I let you go, for people who are keen to learn more about yourself and what you do, where can they go to?
I am pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me at Sugasini Kandiah on LinkedIn. I write quite a bit there. Also, my website, hiddengemtalent.com. You can WhatsApp me or email me to inform on the website.
So people do check her out on LinkedIn. I'll add this into the show notes. Look out for her posts, which will be future Peabody awarded posts as well. And with that, thank you so much for coming on the show, Suga.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Adrian.